My name is Miraj, and for many years I believed that the strength of a home was measured by how tightly you held its pieces together. Even when the walls trembled and the roof threatened to collapse, I kept convincing myself to stay, to fix things, to endure. My marriage to Aisha had once been full of warmth, hope, and little secrets only two people in love could understand. We were dreamers who held hands while crossing crowded markets, who made plans that felt too big for the world, but just right for us. Over time, though, our world softened into silence. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that creates distance, the kind that makes you feel alone, even in the same room. We stopped talking about our days, stopped sharing meals, stopped laughing over silly things. It felt as if love had slowly dissolved into the air while we were too busy pretending everything was fine. The truth is, Aisha wasn't cruel or unkind. She didn't shout, didn't fight, didn't blame. She simply drifted away, emotionally slipping into a place where I couldn't follow. I tried hard, sometimes too hard. I worked long hours to support us, cooked dinner, cleaned the house, planned small surprises that went unnoticed. But no effort seemed enough to bring back what we had lost. I kept hoping that one day she would look at me with the same warmth as before, but some distances, once created, stretch until they become permanent. The night everything changed wasn't dramatic. There was no yelling, no accusations, no dramatic storm. Aisha simply left a folded sheet of paper on the dining table and sat across from me, calm but exhausted. "Miraj, we need to stop pretending. This marriage isn't working," she said. And just like that, everything I had tried to keep alive gently broke. I wanted to fight for us. I wanted to argue, to beg for one more chance. But when I finally looked into her eyes, really looked, I saw a finality I couldn't undo. She had emotionally left long before the divorce papers came. The next morning, I packed my things. Clothes, essentials, nothing more. But memories packed themselves. As I shut the door behind me, I realized I wasn't just leaving a house. I was leaving an identity. Out in the world, everything looked normal. Children playing, neighbors chatting, cars passing. But inside, something heavy sat in my chest. People whispered, friends sent messages filled with pity. But the hardest part wasn't judgment. It was the nights. Nights expose every thought you try to bury. I kept trying to trace where exactly love died. But sometimes love doesn't die in a single moment. Sometimes it fades quietly, unnoticed. The real breaking point happened one evening in a park. I sat on a bench, my face buried in my hands, and cried for the first time in years. Not out of heartbreak, not because of the divorce, but because I felt utterly lost. I whispered into the wind, "I don't know who I am anymore." Oddly, admitting that was the first step toward healing. My journey back to myself didn't begin with therapy or travel. It began with a simple cup of tea. I made tea the way I liked it. Strong, 2 spoons of sugar, extra ginger. It tasted like rebellion, like a small reclamation of identity. It hit me then, I had lived so long adjusting myself to someone else that I had forgotten my own preferences. Did I like scrambled eggs or fried eggs? Did I like beaches or mountains? When was the last time I read a book because I wanted to? Eventually, I started therapy. At first, I avoided the idea, believing I could manage alone. But healing isn't about strength, it's about honesty. My therapist, Dr. Tanya, asked me one question that changed everything. "Miraj, when was the last time you chose something just for yourself?" I didn't have an answer. Therapy taught me that staying in a place where your emotional needs are invisible is its own form of pain. It taught me that you can love someone and still be fundamentally incompatible, that loyalty means nothing if it costs you your sense of self. And most importantly, it taught me to forgive myself, not for the divorce, but for staying quiet for too long. Slowly, life began to rebuild itself around me. I started going to the gym, not for revenge, but because it made me feel alive. I traveled alone to a hill station, watched a sunrise that felt like a personal message from the universe. I reconnected with friends I had let slip away. I discovered I loved photography. Cooking became a hobby instead of a chore. These weren't grand achievements, but each was a small step toward rediscovering the version of Miraj I had abandoned. During this time, I met someone unexpectedly, a woman named Naira at a pottery workshop. She wasn't a romantic interest, but a kind friend with an understanding heart. She had also gone through a divorce and had healed enough to speak from a place of peace rather than pain. One evening, she told me, "Divorce doesn't break you, Miraj. It breaks open the parts of you that you ignored." Her words rooted themselves in my mind. With her friendship, I realized that healing isn't isolation. Healing is connection. Sometimes with yourself, sometimes with people who understand your scars without asking you to explain them. 6 months after the divorce, I found myself standing outside the old neighborhood. Not to see Aisha, but to see the man I used to be. I walked past our old home, and instead of pain, I felt gratitude. Not gratitude toward the ending, but gratitude that it happened. If it hadn't, I would still be shrinking myself to fit into a life that no longer held me. I whispered a quiet thank you to the past and walked away without looking back. That was the moment I truly let go. I didn't become a new person, I simply became myself again. As months passed, I learned who I was all over again. I enjoyed long night walks. I discovered I preferred mountains over beaches. I filled my apartment with warm lights, books, plants, and music. For the first time in years, my home felt like mine. I wasn't just surviving, I was living. People often ask whether I fell in love again. The truth is, yes, I did, but not with someone else. I fell in love with Miraj, the man who rebuilt himself from ashes, who learned to enjoy silence instead of fearing it, who learned to choose himself. Divorce didn't ruin me, it revealed me. It stripped away the noise and left behind the core of who I truly was. Today, when I look in the mirror, I no longer see a broken man or a failed husband. I see a human being who grew, who healed, who learned to breathe again. I found myself after divorce not by searching outward, but by looking inward at the parts of me I had forgotten. And for the first time in many years, I feel whole. Over time, the rhythm of my new life settled into something peaceful, something almost musical. There were still days when echoes from the past tried to claw their way back, moments when a familiar song or the smell of a particular perfume reopened old memories. But instead of drowning in them, I learned to let the memories pass through me like gentle waves. They reminded me that healing doesn't require erasing the past. It requires understanding it. Some evenings, I would sit on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker like distant fireflies. I realized how different the silence felt now. Once, silence had been suffocating, a weight pressing on my chest. Now it felt like comfort, like companionship, like a friend who simply sat with me without demanding anything in return. As months turned into a year, people around me noticed the change before I did. My cousin jokingly said, "You look younger now, Miraj. Divorce suits you." We laughed about it, but somewhere inside, I knew there was truth in his words.
I wasn't carrying the unseen burden of trying to keep a lifeless marriage breathing. I wasn't tiptoeing around someone's moods or trying to mend what had long since cracked. I was lighter, not carefree, but freer. And freedom, I learned, has a way of polishing a soul until it shines. One day, while sorting through old boxes, I found a notebook filled with poems I had written in my early 20s. I had forgotten that I used to write, forgotten that words once poured out of me effortlessly like water from a broken tap. Divorce had taken many things from me, but it had also returned something precious, the desire to create. That night, I opened a blank page and started writing again. Not poems about heartbreak, but reflections about resilience, self-worth, and rediscovery. It became a quiet ritual, one that healed parts of me therapy couldn't reach. Around this time, Naira and I remained close friends. Our bond wasn't rooted in trauma, but in understanding. She had healed enough to become a mirror for me, showing me the parts of myself I had ignored. One evening, while shaping clay during another pottery session, she said, "You know, Miraj, sometimes life breaks you so you can be rebuilt into someone stronger." I looked at the imperfect clay bowl in my hands and smiled. Maybe that's why pottery attracts people like us. We're all trying to give shape to things that once fell apart. We shared a laugh, but the metaphor stayed with me. Life, like pottery, requires patience. You shape it, mold it, break it, and start again until it becomes something meaningful. As the seasons changed, so did I. I began volunteering at a community library, reading to children every Saturday morning. Their laughter, their curiosity, their uncomplicated joy warmed something inside me. I realized how much life I had missed while being trapped in emotional numbness. The children taught me more than any adult ever had, that love doesn't need to be perfect to be real, and happiness doesn't need to be big to be felt. I also started reconnecting with my parents. For years, I had kept a polite distance, embarrassed that my marriage was failing. My mother once held my face in her hands and said, "We wanted you to be happy, not heroic." Those words broke something gently inside me. They reminded me that pain grows heavier when carried alone. So I let them into my world again, not because I needed rescuing, but because I finally understood that love, in its purest form, comes without conditions. Eventually, people around me began asking the predictable questions. Is there someone new? Are you thinking about marriage again? I always answered with a patient smile. I wasn't against love, not at all. But for the first time, I wasn't searching for it. I wasn't trying to fill a void or mend a wound. I was content, truly, genuinely content with myself. And that was a kind of love I had never experienced before. I promised myself that if ever someone were to walk into my life again, it would not be because I needed them. It would be because I genuinely wanted to share my world. It was around this time that I planned my first solo trip abroad. A week in a quiet coastal town, away from everything familiar. I walked along the shore, letting the waves wash over my feet as if greeting an old friend. I sat on rocks and watched sunsets that painted the sky in gold and fire. I breathed in salty air that tasted like freedom. During that trip, I realized that the world was so much bigger than the small box I had trapped myself in during my marriage. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I truly belonged to myself, to my dreams, to the vastness of life. On the last day of the trip, I wrote something in my journal. I am not healing from divorce. I am healing from forgetting myself. That one sentence felt like a summary of everything I had lived and learned. Divorce had been a chapter, not the ending. A painful chapter, yes, but also a necessary one. Without it, I would have never rediscovered the person I was meant to be. When I returned home, I brought back more than souvenirs. I brought back a new sense of direction. I applied for a job that aligned with my passions instead of sticking to what felt safe. I joined a writing group. I planted a small garden on my balcony. Life wasn't perfect, but it felt beautifully mine. And somewhere in the quiet moments between sunrise and sunset, between tea and writing, between laughter and solitude, I realized something profound. I had finally arrived, not at a destination, but at myself.